I'm audible.
Yes, Mohan, you are on earlier.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Adab.
Hello, good evening. Alaikum salam.
Perhaps today we have the last session of this year, other than the AGM which they are planning to have during the year itself. Otherwise, I think it will be the last event, and fortunately, we have got a very, very good speaker today with us, Anil Bhandari ji. And do you want to call it a bad year? I don't think so. Nobody will call it a bad year, because from the perspective of computer, technology, and digitization, I don't think we will call it a bad year, because I think it was a big step forward for all of us. Even though many of our friends, relatives left us, it is very sad. But from the point of view of technology and digitization, especially in many countries, it was a big jump actually. I'm from India, and in my country, in fact, I told you last meeting that we had a Google Meet from the village where the panchayat election or the municipality elections are going on now currently, and the villagers, around 150 people, 200 people, had a Google Meet. So this is a transformation which is happening in countries like us. So I'm sure it's every negative thing, there is a positive thing. So it was really a great year from the perspective of technology, and currently the GITEX is going on, and I think two big events with the participation of people. It's really a great change, and they were really bold enough to include people. One is GITEX, and they are allowing people to come there and participate, and the kind of attention, the kind of precautions they are taking to control the disease, to control the virus is amazing. And I think this will be a new norm, a kind of hybrid situation where people will really have in the years to come something which is online and which is something which is physical, which is really a true example of GITEX, and really hats off to those great guys, the leaders of GITEX and the rulers of this country, amazing leaders for their vision. And another event which happened was the cricket match between India and Australia. And I thought for a moment that the crowd which they were showing in the TV were from some of the old cricket matches, but it was not correct. It was all the live. People are coming there in big numbers and without mask. So I don't think without mask it is advisable, as the virus is still with us. And I don't want to talk too much about those kind of things, because we have today with us Anil ji, who is a very, very busy man. He is a chartered accountant. Again, we had another chartered accountant last meeting, and today we have another chartered accountant from India, and he's a Central Council member. And another big thing happened during this COVID days was the examination of the CA final, CA inter, and all other entrance and all the stuff. And nearly 500,000 students, around 500,000 students turned up, and it was not an easy task for the council members, and with their vision and with their hard work, they could conduct the examinations. Many places it was having a lot of issues. And despite all those constraints, they could conduct the examination. And currently, I think still it's going on. And hats off you to sir. And for the this kind of selfless service, really it was amazing. And I don't have to talk much about Anilji because Anilji was there one of our ISAFE conferences some time back. Still, as a formality, I must introduce him. Anil is an investor in high growth technologies. As an investor and a mentor, he works in tandem with an array of early stage technology companies which focus on mitigating new generation risk. Anil is part of the risk advisory of ANB, a leading risk advisory firm with over 700 professionals. Anil has innovated several cybersecurity solutions, some of which are in latest category in Gartner and protect many large organizations across the world. At ICAI, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Central Council member, I know him for a long time. Wherever I go for any conferences, either it is New York or in Sydney or wherever it is, you can see Anil Bhandari there. Anil has been chairman of Digital Transformation Committee of ICAI, Internal Audit Standards Board of ICAI. And when coming to today's topic, design thinking, identities, and zero trust, cyber professionals and auditors, is it time to take a step back and imagine the landscape? So two big things which is happening is this, what is related to security, or always security has been a concern, physical and cyber security has been a concern from the word go. But today, with a very, very distributed kind of scenario with BYOD and now cloud in a big way, things are out of hand. It's once it was sitting, all the data was sitting at the confines of our offices, and today we don't know where it is sitting because of the impact of cloud. So security at the endpoints is a serious concern, and people like Anilji really they are doing a great job to help organizations to mitigate the risk, because it may be from the computer of a staff, or it may be some you can't trust anybody. So the trust deficit is there actually, and concept has been changed really dramatically. There is a zero trust scenario now, and he'll be talking today about design thinking and zero trust. So I will not take much time, because just you will be eagerly looking forward to hearing from him. And during the this meeting, if you have any clarifications or any queries or anything, please don't hesitate to send it to us through the chat option, or you can, at the end of the session, we can unmute you. You can talk. Please feel comfortable. And Anilji is our family member. He is belonging to us, and even after this conference, you can contact him. He is very, very accessible. And these are some of the people, those who are working 24 hours a day. I've been disturbing for last 2-3 months, and in fact, he committed with me last month. But again, he was selected as a member of SAFA And every day something is transforming in his profession, because these are some of the great leaders, and hats off you to sir. And before Anilji talks, I think Mustafaji, you are here. I don't know whether you are here. Our president, he was supposed to be here, so I'm not sure. You want to have a word, or maybe you can join us towards end. He called me some time back and he said he was a little bit tied up in the office, and I'm sorry I don't see him here. Mustafaji, can you unmute if you're there? Can you unmute and talk if you're there? Yeah, I think he's not there. Let me see whether any messages are there. He is not there. I think he's coming, joining later. So Anilji, without much ado, I am transferring the proceedings to you. Kindly, but thank you for joining us.
So pleasure, Mohanji, and thank you so much for all the good words and a fantastic introduction. I'm not sure I deserve much of that, but I think I have learned one thing in my institute career, and I had done a lot of work for the ISACA as well in India, and I was a past president of the Institute of Internal Auditors as well. That we keep patting each other on our backs with some really good introductions and good words, especially because we want to motivate each other to try and do this job. Because most of the time people don't come forward to do this. But I think it's an interesting position as well, because you tend to do a lot of thought leadership. So thank you so much once again. And thank you, ISACA. It has been, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years that I have once again come on this platform. I have been a part of several CAS conferences in Dubai, and I've had the pleasure of having done the keynote speeches in various properties, beautiful properties that you've held your conferences. And of course, here we are on a very different platform, where we are getting transported through this unique virtual conferences. I used to ask during my internal audit days, and even 2 years back, that who are likely to be competition to airlines. And I used to always come up and say video conferencing softwares. And of course, and I'm sure you would have heard this, and people used to always smile. And here we are today, that we have a video conferencing softwares not only competing, actually one video conferencing software that you are on today, Zoom, accounts for almost more than the valuation of all the airline companies put together across the world. So such are the times that we live in, and these are very, very interesting times. And you started by saying that did we have a good year or a bad year? I'm not sure good or bad. Of course, from a COVID perspective, and all of those who have lost their lives, of course we our condolences. It has not been a very good year. Pandemic is never good. But if you look at this, I think in chaos, there's always an opportunity. And I think any transformation which is waiting to happen has actually happened during this year. And companies would normally hire CIOs, chief technology officers, or information officers to look at transformation. And can you believe it? All transformation happened in like 3 or 4 months, and everybody is able to do just about everything, and life continues in spite of the fact that we sit at home most of the time. That gets us to the problem statement. Now, the world across is actually moving towards amazing amount of digital transformation, as Mohanji has put it. And I'm expecting more than trillions of dollars being spent on digital transformation, and not because you want to work from home, but because essentially every element of business is now broken up into several parts of digital transformation. One is where you try and acquire growth because of digital transformation. And it could be experiential, it could be the new apps which are coming, it could be a new model of business altogether. There are some sections of digital transformation which is to do with creating experience. So for example, if you have customer service or anything like that, you want to make sure that your customers have great experience after they have been brought into the system. And then there's some part of digital transformation which actually looks at process improvements, which could be reduction in cost, doing it better, automated, and so on and so forth. So all of this constitutes some or the other form of investments in almost every industry that one could think of. And if one were to take a deep dive, my suggestion would be to just log on to the World Economic Forum. And if you were to download a report, you would realize that every industry is going through digital transformation. Logistics is likely to become Uberized. It could become crowdsourced. OTT platforms are likely to be crowdsourced because you have content and you need amazing amount of content with everybody glued onto television, or they want entertainment or something or the other is happening. I've always said in several of my speeches that probably you may not see cities tomorrow. Why would you not see cities tomorrow? Because a city would be actually a 400 floor building, and you would have entertainment centers, you would have schools in there, everything in there. And literally, this is what is happening. Now, if all of this were to happen, and especially what you see is happening during this year, you would realize that business models are also going through a change. And there are three emerging business models in the world. The first one being an outcome-based business model. Everybody is worried about the outcome. Nobody wants to So how do I put this? I mean, when you buy a car, it used to be a beautiful-looking car before, but now you want to engage with the car. For example, the likes of Tesla. So outcome is more important, experience is more important, ability to save the cost of petrol is more important, and so on and so forth. The second business model coming in is hyper personalization, which means you walk into a store and, for example, a Nike store abroad, and they will construct our shoes right in there for you. So and then you have the music. People will actually create music on the fly for you. So that's hyper personalization. You then have the third model, which is access versus ownership. People don't want to own stuff today. They actually only want to access service. So, for example, if you're talking about cloud, then everything, people want to access it. They want to use it today. They want to pay for it. And if they don't have the money, they want to withdraw. But everybody wants to enjoy the use of an asset, and people are not wanting to own assets. All of this brings us into a larger question about use of technology, and of course cybersecurity and internal threats. But more than that, if you were to realize, I think it brings us to a good question where I think anything that you do in terms of digitalization would lead to an explosion of identities. And why would it lead to an explosion of identities? It will lead to an explosion of identities because when technologies come in, they need to talk to each other. And when they talk to each other, the only way that one can talk to each other is by some handshake and some authorization and some authentication. And that would also lead you to credentials and passwords and identities. So it's an amazing challenge. I'm not sure if friends here have been able to visualize it. I'm sure you have a lot of auditors here and a lot of cybersecurity professionals, and you would have probably looked at it or faced it. But there is an amazing amount of challenge when you look at trying to think through how do you solve the identity problem. And when you are living in times like these, it's always good to take a step back, right? You normally try and go back to basics. So, for example, if something is not working or you're not able to visualize or cut through the chase, the best thing that normally one does as a human being or just about anybody is take a step back, look at it, and try and see, hey, can I see the full problem statement? And can I find a solution to this full problem statement? And it could be maybe phases, but you need to find a comprehensive solution. And that brings us to our topic today, which is design thinking. Because if you were to do anything like this, you would need to have the thought process of a design thinker, because you're trying to solve a problem which is much larger, and your solution has to be smarter, simpler, and still able to do what it is required to do. And that is what gets us to the table of design thinking. I'll just share my screen with you and take you through the presentation. So please do allow me for a minute. So I hope you're able to see my screen, Mohan.
Yeah, we can see, we can see.
Wonderful.
Good.
All right. So that brings us to our topic. And I know we need to kind of close this presentation at maybe 9:30, 9:40 so that we leave enough time for questions and answers. And if we make this interactive, I think it's going to be more interesting. Having said that, design thinking and zero trust architecture. Now, what's design thinking? Design thinking is not just what it looks or feels like, but design is how it works. And of course, this has been said by Steve Jobs, but how true is that? Now, let's look at the elements that go into a design thinking. What are these elements? Essentially, there are three elements which go into design thinking. And the elements that go into design thinking are human desirability. Is there a desire? Is there a need for something? It could be anything. Then you would get into, is that technologically feasible? So if there is a requirement, is it technologically feasible for some of us or one of us to do that? And then finally, everything which goes in the market has to be business viable. If it's not business viable, you may have some great things, but it may still not work. And that is business viability. So design thinking and innovation is, of course, it could have more elements, but these are three critical elements: desirability, human desirability, technology feasibility, and business viability. Now, if I were to take you to this and try and understand where do we really clock the innovation, if there is desirability and if that is technologically feasible, the intersection actually leads us to a functional innovation, which means functionally you're able to construct something and it will work and people will like it if it works. But if it does not have the business viability, then of course you don't have anywhere to sell. And then whether it will even see the light of the day, one is not sure of. If you have the desirability and if you have the viability, for example, meaning there is a need in the market and it is viable, the intersection leads you to emotional innovation, enables branding and emotional connections because there is a need and there is a business model around it. But what if it is not feasible, which means if it is technologically not feasible? Now, let us look at these elements. This element of feasibility, which means there is a technological feasibility and there is a business model around it, but there is no desirability in the market. And IT security may not be the right example, but it's not a bad example because cybersecurity and IT security and controls, it's always feasible to do those. You can put n number of controls in whatever you do today, and they are business viable. Why? Because there is always a business for controls, right? But when you look at the desirability, all of us, any of us, would we really want to live with constraints and controls in our life? Whether it is our day-to-day life, we don't like the policies, we don't like the traffic lights. Who would want to have controls? So who would want to have security? It actually is sometimes a pain, and you're not able to have your optimum product utilization or whatever. So there is less amount of desirability. But however, if you have desirability, if you have viability and feasibility, you have this intersection, which actually leads you to great innovation. And this is something that all of us or most of us should aim to do, because whether it's internal audit, whether it's cybersecurity professional, whether you're looking at a process, whether you're looking at a product, it's important that it should be desirable, it's important it should be practical, feasible, and it should be viable. And if it is, let me try and now apply these concepts to none other than identities, which is the subject matter of our topic today. Now, there are several identities, and I'm not sure if you would have probably realized, but as humans, you have human identities. Machines have their own identities. For example, every machine that you see has some or the other form of identities, even including the iRobo that you would probably get at home to maybe mop your floor or clean your floor. It would have an identity. It would have some form of identity. Let me talk to you about the human identity first. The human identities could be the name that you have, the second name that you have. And if that is converted into a piece of paper, you may end up having a passport, or you may end up having a social security card, or maybe a Emirates identity card, which is your identity, for example, in the UAE. And you may have your thumbprints, for example. This also is a kind of identity that you carry with you, and it's been very often used, especially in the Middle East, in terms of dual factor authentication and so on and so forth. So you're proving your identity. The interesting piece of an identity today is actually your mobile devices. Your mobile devices mirror your identities today. Why is that so? Because 50% of the time you're doing OTPs, even if you're calling for food to eat, for example, at home, you're actually doing an OTP. It could be SMS OTPs, it could be WhatsApp OTPs, it could be push, it could be emails. You're literally doing something or the other on the phones. Now, and there would be a time in the future that if you lose your mobile phones, you may probably end up losing your identity. I mean, that is the usage of this mobile device that you do today. Your banking transactions are dependent on that. And let me, for the time being, let's forget about this. Let's understand uh, what these identities are and what they translate into. Now, mobile devices, of course, could be several. So you could have mobile phones. You could actually have laptops, and of course, these are mobile. Even your desktops, for example, you may even have your desktops, and so you could have your iPads, you could have your mobile phones, you could have your laptops. All of these machines have some or the other form of identity. And can you imagine that the world today, and I'll come back to that, but the world today has a population of roughly around 7 billion people. But if you do a device count, and a lot of us have maybe two or three devices, it could be 15. And it's said that maybe this is old, it's just in the next 2 or 3 years, you may end up having 50 billion device population. Can you imagine the explosion? Now, can you imagine you already had 7 billion identities in the world, right? And you now have to live with 50 billion identities just because you have some or the other mobile devices that you have. And if you were to now look at it, why are there 50 billion identities? Every iPad that you have would probably have some, every phone that you have, for example, would have an IMEI number. Every iPad that you would have would probably have a MAC address, and in some part or the other. A laptop would have a MAC address, and these become your identity. And today, an identity is actually a combination of not only these, because these can be spoofed, it is starting to become which geo you're coming from, what is your IMEI number, what is the MAC address that you have. And suddenly, the tools and technologies today have a combination of all of these three, and they convert into some form of an identity, which could be 1, 2, 3, for example. Now, forget about that. You looked at 50 billion devices. I'm saying 50 billion is too low because you have your wearables coming in, and you have your Apple Watches, and you, of course, have your health bands, and you would be surprised. All of these have Bluetooths, all of these have Bluetooths, all of these have wirelesses. And not only one or the other form, the wireless would have an identity, the Bluetooth has an identity, your watch has an identity, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure if you're able to comprehend the actual challenge of the identity that the world would face, or is already facing. It is phenomenal. So, and 50 billion today actually looks a very, very small number. Now, while I spoke to you about identities of all of that, we get into a new piece of identity. And I'm sure this is not new for all of us. I'm sure you would have, and some of us would be working in power companies, and these power companies would have towers being connected, and they would have manufacturing operations, and they would have machines which are connected to these, and these are nodes. And these nodes are then connected to maybe a central node, and these central nodes could be called as maybe SCADA devices, and this really becomes your console. So what's new in this? Earlier, there was no concept of an identity because you literally walk up to this node and you do your transaction. But today, everybody wants to sit in a central location and work on a unified environment. Now, unfortunately, these have identities, and these have identities, and these have identities, and they could again run into millions. And this is true for your airports. This is true for your nuclear plants. And I don't know if you would have heard the case of a nuclear plant in Iran going down simply because somebody could just maybe get into an identity, got it done in RDP, and the only thing that they had to do was they had to just increase they had to get into a device where they had to just increase the temperature. And because the temperature was high, people had to shut down the plant. And because you shut down a nuclear plant or you shut down a glass factory, you actually need to clean the entire plant, and that cannot be brought up. I mean, it takes literally a month to bring this up, and a power plant or a nuclear plant may take 2 months to bring this up. Can you imagine the destruction, the chaos, the loss of money, reputation, defenses of the nations, and so on and so forth? And on top of that, you're now going to face this unique challenge of trying to measure your IoT identities. So, what are these identities? And most of us would have probably seen cameras on the streets. You would now have these cameras at home, for example. And unfortunately, these cameras could be on drawing rooms, in your bedrooms, and you would put your heat sensors here, and you may even have a washing machine, for example. You could have fridge. And with the 5G coming in, it is expected, and believe me, I have some of these devices at home. They interconnect, they talk to each other, and probably you might see a day tomorrow where you get up in the morning where your watch actually tries to nudge you, but before doing that, it actually logs on to your Google Maps and checks whether the traffic is okay. And if the traffic is okay, it may probably let you sleep for another 10 minutes and then later on nudge you. And when you wake up, you will stand in front of a mirror, would probably scan you, and the mirror would talk to your geyser to say that, hey, this gentleman is walking in for a bath, and please, he likes a 20-degree hot water bath. And your geyser, once you're done, would probably talk to your coffee machine, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you would have heard of all of this. This is not trying to be dramatic. What I'm trying to say is that the underlying fundamental problem statements here are that machines talk to each other even today, and they're expected to talk to each other tomorrow. And they would all be then controlled from an app, and everywhere you would only have identities and credentials and protocols, and these would lead to a challenge of authorization and authentication. And coming back to the world of technology, which is even today, and if some of us are internal auditors, technology auditors, I'm sure you would already be grappling with most of these challenges. But look at APIs. APIs are small pieces of code, and they actually talk to each other all throughout. So it's not only the IoT, but you could use them to talk to the OT, you could use them to talk to the device. And every piece of API is a challenge in itself. And every piece of API would have to have authentication and would have to have some form of credentials. And it could be tokens, it could be certificates. But believe me, all of these are nothing but some sort of an identity to tell you that, hey, this is who I am, and I'm trying to connect to you. And am I the right person to try and connect to you or not? Interestingly, this is not even the end of the challenge. And when you look at an API, the API can be broken up into three layers. And layer one could be the system layer, so which is way down here. The layer two could be the process layer, which is the way down from here. And the layer third APIs could be the experiential APIs. Now, can you imagine that you were not happy with one API in a process or in an intersection or an interaction with technologies? You would have three layers of API. And all of these three layers of API then have to talk to each other, because that's how you're constructing it. And today, with the cloud coming in, you have this unique challenge of microservices, which is nothing but micro APIs in a way. And there is a small function of code written to do a very small function. For example, creating a user is one small function. Changing the user profile is one small function. And deleting a user is another small function. And maybe sometimes if the application is used in a super velocity driven use cases, even changing an address could be a single API or a microservice. So all of this then talk to each other, and then you would need to communicate and make sure the authentications are happening. So you are from the challenges that you had, you are actually landing on top of another challenge, which again run into millions and billions today. And as if that world was not good or enough for identity challenge, you suddenly have these bots coming in. And what are these bots? Another small pieces of code. But the objective of these codes is to actually do a repetitive task. So I the way that I look at it in the next 2 years is that all of us would have a small bot on our desktops or laptops. And these bots could be efficiency bots, could be process bots. They would take away maybe 10 or 15 or 20% of your repetitive jobs. So if you are, for example, an auditor or you're an accountant and you do reconciliation, for example, now reconciliation is something which is repetitive because the algorithm is can be identified and can be set. You might have a reconciliation bot tomorrow. And there are several community bots if you go to platforms like UiPath or Automation Anywhere or Blue Prism. And these bots then do what? These bots actually act on your behalf, and they actually then talk to the system, and they connect to the system and do your job. So it could be even the basic data entry. Now, if they have to do that, they have to be on your system. B, they have to connect to the application. And the moment they connect to something, you would need a user ID and password. So again, a credential, again, an identity. And these could be, again, these are non-human identities. These are not even machine identities, but they are non-human identities because these robots or these bots are also doing significant portion of your work. We expect that a lot of us expect that in this field that this would again run in billions because there would be a bot for just about every repetitive task that you do. So these are some expected challenges which are likely to blow up in the very near future. And these are challenges that you may want to understand, you may want to visualize, or you may want to, if you're a risk manager, you may want to put this on your Excel sheets because your organizations are either already invested or are likely to be investing or are thinking of investing in the very short term or the near future. And if they are doing any of those, all of those would have to be tracked, and we will have to understand how do you look at cybersecurity? How do you look at credentials? How do you vault these credentials? How do you control those user IDs? And unfortunately, our basic problem statements of reconciling a basic application user IDs are still not completed. We still struggle with it. We still try to implement an IAM solution and so on and so forth. So we're still not out of that challenge, and we have landed up on a large challenge. And that is why there's a need for us to take a step back and then try and do a design thinking to all of these problems. Let me take you to some old challenges which we are still not able to overcome these old challenges. And what are these challenges? Well, this is the simplest one today in the market. You have the remote access challenge, and you have third parties sitting and trying to access your system. Not only third party, nowadays, even all of us are actually sitting at home, and then they're trying to access your applications, which are in your data center or in your cloud, or you could even access a desktop, which is in your office. And suddenly, while you were trying to control what you had in the office, the same set of people are now outside or more, and you have to try and control people coming in from outside with, again, different set of identities. It could be development shops. What do you do? What you do is you create a VPN, and then you create maybe an agent, and this agent then lets you log on to your network and you get an IP address there. But there's another challenge that you have to start managing a VPN and combination, or you do a VDI, and the VDI lets you on a desktop internally. And then suddenly, if there are 5,000 employees, you may end up having 5,000 VDI stacks from VMware. And these stacks, you had the laptops to manage. Suddenly, you have VDI stacks to manage. I mean, this is endless, and this is really crazy. Now, coming to the fact that, assuming that you try to solve this problem, but historically, this problem we are never able to solve, and these are the hard-coded credentials that you have in your applications. And believe me, if you're working for a large bank or mid-sized companies, and if you're using 20, 30 applications as well, all of them have some or the other hard-coded applications in an INI file, in a config file, and these files are then used to connect to your data stores. Can you assume if SAP has an internal connection, which is called maybe say SAP R3, and I have a password for that, and it's your customer database, and I can then go and fire a select star on the customer database, and then I can bring out the balances, and I can then post it on the internet. And even better than that, I can use this password to take out maybe just 10 pence or maybe just 0.05 pence from every account, and maybe push it into maybe a couple of other accounts and stuff like that. A very old way to do it, but that problem statement still continues and you're not able to solve this. And again, that was not enough. You started to have the consoles come up, and the SaaS platforms have come up in thousands today. And all of these platforms have started to have their own consoles, either for user accesses or for backend accesses or administration. And then, of course, you have the larger platforms of AWS and Azure, which have actually shifted your entire data center here. So you have a hybrid model. And most of the time, it's said that a lot of data now for large organizations continue to sit in the cloud. And that is another set of user ID and credentials that you have to manage. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the CI/CD concept. The world is actually moving towards the fact is that all of us want everything very fast, right? Earlier, when you would used to buy maybe a Microsoft product or maybe an application, after 2 or 3 years, there used to be an update on the software, right? And we were still happy about it. But today, unfortunately, we're not happy about it. When we're accessing a Google or you're accessing any application, the desire is to have new features on a daily basis. So when you look at an app and suddenly you have a nice new, when you're looking at an app and you have suddenly a nice new a feature leaping up, and you're so happy because you want to use something new, and it suddenly popped up. And well, it's not sudden. It has a lot of stuff going behind it to ensure that these kind of features are available to you online. And for that, you need to do a continuous integration, which is called the CI, which is you do the development. The people wanted agile. You create a small piece of code. You actually push it through testing. You actually pull the code. You actually run the test on a larger server, merge the code, create actually the production environment, and finally push it to the production. Build it and then push it to the production. And this is something which is called a pipeline. And these have started to come up in thousands in the cloud because the expectation is that we want this to be really, really fast. And well, that's not the point. The point is not whether we want something fast. The point is every piece of this technology or this pipeline is actually shifting a live code, which earlier we never used to give access to the developer to the production environment. But today, interestingly, a developer in some or the other way has access to your production environment. So gone are the days when an auditor, especially a systems auditor, would go in and ask, hey, don't give your product or development guys access to even your test environment, even your UAT environment. They should have their own test and development environment. And then there should be somebody else moving it. And then there should be somebody else moving it from the UAT environment to the production environment. Gone are those days. You have different applications and you push the code all the way. While you do that, every interaction that you have, pull or push, every build that you have, every time the code goes anywhere, you have user ID and password or credentials, and you suddenly have identities. Everywhere you will have an identity. And finally, on the production machine, you would need the identity, which is a privileged identity, because you need to push the code. Now, if all of these important identities currently are actually just entered in to these applications, which means if I have an access to this application, I can always find out what is in there. And if I have access to maybe this application, I can find out what is in there. And then suddenly I can go and connect to your production environment. So while you are being agile and while you want to move fast, you're opening up so many doors that people can actually misuse it internally or even externally. And believe me, what the cyber attackers want is not your and my identity. They want the privileged identity. And if they are able to get the privileged identity, you're done. You're finished. And these features could suddenly change overnight and they could go and do something else. And while you are trying to maybe send maybe $1,000 to somebody, in the background, it could just shift your $1 million. I know all of you, my colleagues in the Middle East, are very, very rich. So suddenly you could have $1 million moving out of your account overnight without you having even known about it. And while we do all of this, you also have this challenge in your organization. So I'm not sure if you have gone into your organization and asked them, hey, who handles your Facebook account of the organization, your Twitter accounts of the organization? Most of the time, you would be said that the marketing department handles it. There are only 3 people in the marketing department, but you would be surprised that they've actually outsourced it to a marketing agency. And this agency has access to all your user IDs and passwords and credentials and identities. This Facebook page is an identity that you have. And if somebody were to post something, the reputation risk that you run today is fairly high. And the impact is also very high because we have seen in the past, if something has gone wrong on Twitter, the valuations of these stocks, especially for good companies and large ones, really go down, and there is wealth which is lost overnight. And then now you have to start managing these identities. And these are not easy to manage because most of the time you're using your mobile phones to maybe update something, and your bosses want it to be updated very quickly. And then finally, you have a lot of these automation tools coming in. Like I said, there were bots, there are also automation solutions. And these automation solutions do a lot of stuff internally, whether it be your infrastructure or whether it be your applications. And all of these automation tools, again, need to connect to your applications or infrastructure. And they would also have a lot of identities coming in. So I'm not sure if anybody here, and we would love to have a conversation towards the end of this session, but I'm not sure if anybody here has put all of this in a piece of canvas and said, hey, I have these set of problems. And we actually try and grapple with basic problems, but you have larger sets of problems sitting there. And do you even have a mitigation around it? And it could be manual for all you care, but is there some way to, try and mitigate all of this? So how does one look at identity today? I get you to now trying to understand some basics about identity. While I gave you the challenges, I gave you the expected challenges, let's talk to you about some basic identity issues that you still have today. And these are very relatable to all of us because all of us are familiar with basic applications. And I was saying that we are not able to even grapple with these kind of identities. So the basic challenge that you have is you have your application stacks, you have your infrastructure, that is the data center stack, and it could be operating systems and web servers, and it could be your firewalls, storage devices, and today I'm not sure, but in the Middle East, I think the MFA is very expected and accepted way of doing things. So you would have your applications, you would have some access control on these, you would have put some securities around it, and it could be a double factor, it could have an Active Directory, you could have endpoints and DLPs so that your data does not go. And most of that time, you would probably realize that your organization has invested in things like these. Now, this challenge is that this is in premise. Now, while this was not enough, unfortunately, you may end up having 2 or 3 MFAs because some of your data centers does not work on one MFA and some of your applications may not work. And suddenly you realize in your organization, you have 2 or 3 security solutions. This entire thing is now mirrored in the cloud. So in the cloud, you have, again, applications come up, and you have, again, infrastructure come up, the AWSs, the Dockers, the containers, and you have applications come up. And all of this, again, you want to protect. So in the cloud, you will end up buying some access and security. And you may have a different MFA in the cloud, a different cloud SSO, maybe an Okta, and you may want to put up a different DLP in the cloud because the use cases in the cloud are different. And sometimes you'll end up having mix and match of all of that. And because you have a mix and match, the experience that you have is absolutely crap. You don't have a very good experience when it comes to security. And of course, what you're trying to do is protect an identity and protect a device in today's world. And I will talk to you about it again. But even if your organization you'd probably come back and say, hey, no, you know what? My organization has invested in an IAM solution, for example. And we are able to meet a lot of these basic challenges that you're talking about. May not be advanced ones that I spoke to you about, but some of these basic ones that you're able to do that. But I'm not sure if you realize this and you go back to your organization, you will realize that there is 30% of applications or almost 30 to 40% of the infrastructure devices that you're not able to handle. And you will also realize from your technology team members, and sometimes you may not know this, but almost 50 to 60 to 70% of your cloud applications you will not be able to handle. And they would probably come back with an answer to say that, hey, you know what, we bought an IAM for infrastructure on internal devices. We cannot handle cloud. We are still thinking through it. We'll come back to you with a control, blah, blah, blah. And you would tend to have a challenge there. So while you may have IAM, the conventional ones, they don't really help you. As an auditor or as a cybersecurity professional, you always want to put a lot of gates. You want to tell people use MFA, you want to tell people use passwords, you want to put a lot of gates, like I said, a lot of controls. But please remember one thing, the more controls you put, the larger is the issues which come up. And because you have a lot of issues when you put up a lot of controls, there is also dilution. So you need to strike an optimum balance between the controls and practicality of running these controls. And especially as internal auditors, we always rush in our minds to put as many controls as possible because we always come from the fear factor, but that's not right. You need to be practical because if you're not, you will start having issues and it'll start cracking. And the moment it cracks, you will realize that your security is actually downgraded because people are not able to use it. You know what this is called? This is called high friction. This is called high friction and low security. The moment you start putting high friction controls, your security posture actually comes down, which means if you're able to put some simple controls and people use it, 90%, 95%, 99%, you actually tend to have high security. And we will try and see if we can address that issue. Now, what's the time check there? 9:25. All right. So maybe I'll talk to you for the next 10 minutes about how do you visualize these challenges and how do you kind of think through this, and in today's world, how would this probably work? COVID-19 has brought in new challenges for us. We work from home, we now learn from home, of course we earn from home, education has changed, and literally you would see our kids actually doing virtual accesses. So this entire concept of in-premise, in-cloud, machine identities, human identities, non-human identities would now have to be looked at from a virtual access perspective as well. Earlier, you used to have a desktop and a bot. Today, you may have a laptop and a bot, and you may want to run this bot sitting at home. So you have a typical virtual access for anything and everything that you do, which means you need to visualize. The first thing is there a secured virtual layer which you can build on top of all of these infrastructure or applications or whatever? And if you're able to build a nice layer on top of it, then you're able to handle this very easily because then it has only one layer on top of it. Now it's easier said than done. But fortunately for us, the world and the technology has moved fast in today's time that you're able to now handle most of these issues by creating a single layer, which actually helps you to work and control all of these challenges, and maybe with in a particular way. And of course, one of such products or companies that I would probably mentor have looked at this and have spent millions of dollars trying to research as to how do we come out with a solution which helps you to try and create a full spectrum of access where you're able to handle not only the human identities, but also the privileged identities and also the machine identities. And there has to be a way to manage the life cycle of human identities. The life cycle of privileged identities are different, and the life cycles of machine identities are different. Of course, you may not have all the possible features and all the possible gigs that you may want, but the idea is that do you have one visualization of all the identities, and are you able to control that? And that also leads you to better experience, and that is more important because if you have better experience, people use it. And the first one would be the passwordless approach. Today, if you put in a lot of gates, you have a challenge, and that is where you actually get into zero trust. So the passwordless approach, and I'm sure you would have invested in some of the other passwordless approach in the Middle East, but today OTP at that point in time because you may be out in a cafe, for example, or you may be wanting to use a soft token because you know what, you're offline. And if this experience is there, and then you may want to go and request for a just-in-time access. Always remember, a zero trust model means a continuous assessment of who you are, where you're coming from, what you're doing. And eventually, what you're accessing becomes very important because data is finally going to become the mainstay of any security thing that we do in the future. So the entire construct should be not to give somebody just about everything and anything. The entire construct should be that build up a platform where you have a continuous risk assessment of anybody who comes into your organization, which would depend on the data that he or she accesses. He could have accessed the data yesterday, that's fine, but he cannot access the data today, or he could have accessed the data in a particular context yesterday, but his context could be different today. And all of this has to be managed with just in time, which means anytime that you need an access, you request for it. And now it doesn't mean that it has to go into workflow solutions. It takes you 7 days to approve. You actually built in an AI ML layer below this, and then your just-in-time access also becomes very, very quick and very, very interesting. So I spoke to you briefly about Zero Trust model. It's a continuous assessment. It increases your visibility. It can lead to more granular access. It would lead to automation, and then it would lead to response, because when you're doing all of this, the geo that comes in, adaptive authentication, the way that you behave, the way that you type, user behavior authentication, all of that goes into, say, a continuous risk assessment of who you are, when you're accessing, where you're accessing from. And it could then disconnect you at any point in time it finds that your behavior is not the way that it should be. So the way that you need to look at your identities and vaults today is maybe in a fashion like this, where the framework is that you should be able to use any MFA, you should be able to have an SSO on top of a zero trust model, a just-in-time access, and that this should be ideally built on a virtual access platform. Because today, I think most of us would agree that you could be anywhere and you could be accessing anything. And that should work with business applications, that should work with endpoints, that should work with data center. And that is where that you have vaults and identities thought through, and then the governance kicks in. So I think that layer and that framework being very, very important. And if you just plug in the AI ML below this, you would see amazing amount of improvisation. How would you see amazing amount of improvisation? Because if you use the neural network and the deep learning below that, you would know that who is coming in, what is he accessing, what information is he accessing, what day is that, what time is that, what is his habits, what is his keystroke, what are the commands that are fired. If you do a multiplication or an algorithm of all of this, you would realize that suddenly you come to a behavior change. And that is something that you want to look at. You don't want to look at every permission. You don't want to look at every access request that comes in. You don't want to look at false positive, which happens today. So it has to be much, much smarter than what we have today. I think if you have something like this thought through, and in a framework that we can build through, you will actually realize one thing, that we're actually looking at, in a very limited way, of course, you're actually looking at something like a Netflix, for example. It's really low friction. You can access it from any device. It could be a desktop, it could be a mobile phone, it could be a television with a smart television. It actually starts from where it left you. It actually tells you which geo you're coming from. It actually access controls you to say, hey, you're coming from a different geo. I will not give you access to this content. And even if you download a content, it will probably not let you access it after it expires. So you really love to use this because it's simple to use with all the built-in security and AI ML piece into it. So if you were to imagine your Office applications to work or your applications to work, would you not want to imagine something like this? You typically want to imagine something like this. And that leads us to this interesting question. I want my access now. I want my data now. That is important because that is experience. You want your access. You want it quickly. You don't want to wait for the entire day or 5 days to get your access. You want to access a particular set of data. It may not be as per your grade, but you still want to access it because you want to finish a project, and that should be just in time. And you still want to have privacy, and you still want to make it simple. So this is typically a framework where you want it in this order. And there's always this challenge between operations and security, and you need to find the right connect between the operation and the security. Always, always. It has to be simple for people to use it. That is what I call as low friction and high security, because the moment you have low friction, people will use it. The moment people use it, you have landed on a high security platform. So the things to remember is you need to take a step back. You need to have the design concept built into your identity framework in your organizations such that it leads you to a low friction but a high security module. And this can be only done if you're building it up on top of a zero trust module. And finally, I would say, please do go back to offices and relook at your identities and vaults, especially if you're an auditor or you're a cybersecurity expert. And if I were to finally, towards the end, if I were to extend this discussion to endpoints, there is something which is very interesting emerging on the endpoints. And what is emerging on the endpoints? Let me try and explain this in a couple of minutes. If this is your endpoint, you would probably realize that you have different layers of control. This is the first one, this is the second one. And what you do is, in your organizations, they literally lock you up. They lock your laptop. They don't want a USB. They don't want you to access internet, blah, blah, blah. So they harden the device. They control the admin privileges. They put endpoint protection, and they put several agents which actually make your laptop very slow. Like, one is an antivirus, one is an anti-malware, one is something to do with maybe a force point or whatever. And then finally, they control the installation of applications. So if you don't need an SAP, they will not install an SAP. But when you finally need it, you'll have to actually spend 4 days in trying to acquire an SAP access. And in today's world, and in today's world where you have so much of technology evolution and transformation, why would you want to wait for 4 days to get an SAP access? That's crazy, right? And then, of course, the top layer talks about authentication and LDAP, AD, dual factor authentication, and so on and so forth. With all of this, what are you trying to do? This is actually becoming more and more device-centric. This is device-centric, this layer is device-centric, and this has got a very limited user context to it. What are you trying to do? You are actually trying to find a problem statement, because the moment you try and attack a device, you are trying to find a problem in millions of devices that you would have in your organization. Now, how good is that for security? But unfortunately, this is how it is done in the real world today. I think the context that most of us have probably not thought through, or maybe are thinking through today, is this layer. And what is this layer? This layer is the user and the data context layers. It is said that wars would be fought for data in the future. So, for example, this layer now becomes very, very important as to what is the user accessing, what piece of data he's accessing, what time is he accessing, and this is what is more important. I don't care if you get a phishing attack from a bank with whom you're not banking with. You want to stop a phishing attack only if you deal with the bank and it is that phishing attack of that bank. So, for example, if you have an XYZ bank phishing account, you don't have an account, you don't want to even bother about it. But if you have an ABC phishing account comes and it says, hey, fill up this form, you are bothered about it. You want to stop this. You want to stop this. You don't want to waste your time here. And that is where the context becomes important. Why? Because I don't have an account here, but I have an account here. And there are both phishing attacks. But which phishing attack should I look at? I should look at this phishing attack. This is what I want to work on, right? So what we are saying is that in the future, it will all to be done with the user and the data context, and the behavior will become very, very important. And you may want to look at the user behavior analytics here, which would act as a third layer of defense. This would ease it up because laptops and iPads were meant for operational use. They were meant for productive use. But today, I think security locks it up. In the future, the security would be do what you want to do, where you want to do it, from where you want to do it, when you want to do it. But we will change the way these tools work to ensure that we will look at your user and the context of the data, and we will let you do things and we will not let you do things. So if you're safe, we will let you browse the internet. If it's safe, we will let you plug in a USB and take the file, because you know what? You do that on a daily basis because you're a part of the operations team. So here we are. I would only want to say that I think fundamentally, you would need to relook at a lot of stuff in today's time from a risk perspective, from a control perspective. And if you're a cybersecurity professional, even a building up controls would become very important, because I think what you need to look at is this layer, which is becoming so and so important today. So I think this is what I thought I would like to kind of, lay down to you. It has nothing to do with the product. It has nothing to do with anything specific. What it has to do with is the thought process. And of course, you could have a mix and match of products, or you could have one great thing that you would have. or you could have manual controls around it. But it's important to revisit. It's important to go back to your basics if you are trying to do digital investments in your organization. So, such is the interesting times that we live in. And I really hope that all of us put together are able to think through and try and have the right set of things for our organization or even individually. I have not spoken to you about the customer identity and access, but all of us today have some sort of accesses on several portals. It could be the car that you buy, it could be a nice watch that you buy, it could be your power provider, it could be your telephone provider. Oh my gosh, I think they would run into millions again. So here I am, and thank you so much for patiently listening to me. I would love to. I would love to answer questions, take some questions, maybe some thoughts that anybody would have, and maybe then chat around it, come back with some better and newer ideas. So back to you, Mohan. This is what I thought I would like to quickly improvise on and talk to our members about. Thank you so much.
Anilji, it was really awesome, and we really enjoyed. And you touched upon almost all today, and it shows and it talks volumes about your exposure to the current scenario and experience. Hats off to you, sir. So, just you were mentioning in your talk some of the things which really stuck me. One is the practicality of controls, which is really very important, because now for controls you can enforce, because the more controls, the more problem, and really it is we have to have a real balance on that. And you mentioned about API, and today we are using a lot of stuff like Facebook and LinkedIn and all those sort of things. And I have a question to you, sir. Actually, just see, when today when we use, for instance, Facebook. Sorry to specifically name Facebook. Uh, you know, uh, Certain things they can record. For instance, certain things they can encroach to your territory, and they can control on your applications. And today they will decide where we should go, what we should do. And don't you think this is a wrong practice? And how far this kind of API controls should, what kind of controls we should have when we use a social sites like this? Especially, I'm talking from the perspective of a company. I'm not talking about the perspective of an individual.
No, if you look at controls on the social media, especially from a company perspective, the first thing you need to really go and lock your social media account. So I'm sure it'll be with your marketing team. Somebody would have it. You should integrate that social media account into a privileged identity and access management solutions, which actually help you to integrate, and then they help you to actually revisit it, keep a record of it. And you should be able to then rotate the password. Now, here comes the problem. The social media accounts don't give you the APIs for changing the passwords, which means the LinkedIn's that you have, the Facebook that you have, they're really painful. You have to actually log on, you have to change the password every 30 days. Who the hell? You may put up all the policies in the world, right? But who the hell would actually go and do all of this? You can't even audit it. In your own systems, you will come back with a log and tell your administrator, hey, you said 30 days, but you're not changing in 30 days. And I know that. And he'll be forced to do that. Who will force you to do that in a Facebook? And imagine the impact that a Facebook could, let me put it this way. You are from a bank, and one of the employees who's really pissed off goes and says, we are short of cash today, and none of the ATMs would work after maybe, say, 10 o'clock. You'll probably have a run on the bank, right? And you would probably have a huge queue. And by the time the bank actually tries to do something, your money will run out of your ATMs. And if the money runs out, it will have another set of lines. So these seems to be smaller issues. But when you look at it with, let me put it this way, the world has changed. They're no longer cyber attackers, they're target attackers today. Everything is targeted. So if they really want to attack and create an impact, it has to be always targeted attacks. So your bank would literally go down. So you need to ensure that you're able to rotate credentials. Now, how do you rotate credentials? You would need to look at a potential framework or a solution which can use the robotics way of trying to change the password. So you have bots today, and bots are able to do what? They're able to mimic you. They're able to do whatever you do on a screen, for example. May not be the best way to do it, may not be very efficient, but the bots are very, very good today, right? And they are improvising over the day. And you could probably have a platform which can integrate a bot, and the bot then helps you to do something. So that's why I said when I started my presentation, it's not a question of a product, or it's not a question of what you do. It's a question of how do you set up a framework, and for every hole, how do you say and use maybe simple, efficient ways to plug the hole. So these are two things which are very, very critical when you try and see control through social media.
Okay. I have heard one of your conferences some time back in India, and you were mentioning that the word repetitive will be removed from the dictionary of all accountants, and maybe from all transactions. And how do you think that? Maybe I heard this one from 5 years back, and today it's in vogue, and in a very, very big way. We are removing the repetitive transactions. And what is your thought on this one? How much the impact will be there in the next 2 to 3 years? This kind of
significant impact, Mohan. Significant impact. In fact, why only 2 to 3 years? I'm seeing some impact coming in maybe a year later, for example. And one of the innovations that myself and some of us are trying to do here is to create a robo or a bot, or you may want to call it, we call it as a robo because it's an intelligent bot. So the moment you put some intelligence, it tries to mimic what you're doing. And can I have a internal auditor robo tomorrow? Maybe yes. Can I have a statutory auditor robo tomorrow? Maybe yes. So what does a statutory auditor actually do? They come, they take your ledger account, they look at your OPEX or CAPEX, and they try to understand whether you followed the accounting standards or not, right? Is that too complex? There are only 2 or 3 options that a statutory auditor has. If you have a CAPEX transaction of more than 5,000, it may go into one bucket. If you have less than 5,000, it will go into another bucket. And if you're buying a software, which maybe over a period of time will give you value, you can go through an amortization. So literally, you only have 2 or 3 or 4 choices. Now, how difficult is it for people like you and me to put up an algorithm for that? Not very difficult. So it's pretty simple to build up an algorithm to say, hey, I will pull out the ledger, I will look at the accounting entry, I will look at the corresponding documents. Now, there comes a challenge. Documents are physical before, but most of our organizations are on document management solutions. Now comes a challenge. Do you have smart robots to read the document? Yes. 80 to 90% of the documents can be read. It's only a question of trying it. And I know most of us here would be thinking, hey, all of these use cases are not possible. But I'm telling you that, for example, we have built up a P2P. We have built up a P2P auditor, for example. It knows 500 checks that it may want to do on a P2P. And it will only connect to SAP, it will connect to any of your systems, bring it down, do your audit, come back to you and tell you what your problem statements are. So I am imagining that there would be a robo all of us would have, because at the end of the day, we all want our jobs to be more efficient, and all of us would be having, and it will help us to do a lot of things in the future. A simple robo could be, can I help you to clean my mailbox? Now, when you go to Google is already trying to do that if you look at it. There would be generic robots to say, I will respond to your emails. Why? Because I know for the last 5 years, how have you responded to your wife, for example? You always tell her to wait because you're busy in trying to do something. How difficult is that to respond, for example? Not very difficult, right? Or you respond to her very quickly, for example. And the best response that you give it to is your boss. You always tell him, look, I'm doing something. Can I just come in after 5 minutes? Or whatever it could be. So what I'm saying is, after learning millions of data points, it is actually simpler and your output is actually better because you have considered millions of data points before you're responding. So, Mohan, I think I'm seeing this happen in the next 1 year. And you would probably see a lot of things personally coming in from me.
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask any questions, they can unmute and they can ask questions to Anilji. Please unmute and ask questions. No worries.
Can I? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sure, I am.
Okay. Thanks for the very informative presentation. Though I have asked the question actually, but probably you may or may not able to understand what I want to ask. So this is where actually my question is: there are so many technologies, so many products, so many tools, so many security solutions, so complex architecture, and how this when the enterprise actually thinking of in near future to start such kind of solution, because as you rightly pointed out, actually it is so rapidly happening, even it doesn't give you time to think and implement, because in a proper right design way, and you have, because you have to adapt the legacy, you cannot throw it away, and you also have to go to the new technologies and solution. So how do actually, what should be the enterprise priorities? Because you might have experienced that, so this is where I'm seeking advice. And also,
So yeah, sorry, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
no, you can address this, because it is not just that you may able to have a solution in place for fast track, but what happens to the skilled resource who is going to maintain it, and how difficult it is to retain them, and all these challenges which are very practical, and how companies or enterprises are addressing this.
Right. So first is you will not have a solution which meets 100% of your requirement, because not everybody would have thought through everything, and it's not possible to construct something overnight and give you a solution to all your problem statements. For example, all that I spoke to you about. So that gives us the second question is, what do I really do when I'm looking out for solutions? Now, my suggestion would be you would have to look at solutions where the people, the OEM or the partner, and typically and preferably the OEM, has the ability or the thought leadership to be able to take you through a maturity curve. So you don't solve everything today, because if you try to solve it, you might even crack your infrastructure. So is there a maturity curve that somebody is able to walk you through? Number one. Number two, you don't need fancy solutions, fancy graphs. Believe me, they are not at all useful, because half the time, some fancy security solutions are only giving you false positives, right? What you need is practical, doable stuff, which takes care of your control statement. So if I were to try and answer your question, because you had three or four built into one, how would you look at it? I would look at it in the way, how would you manually do this if you had to do that? And if you're trying to marry the basic manual concepts into a technology, is the technology able to do something similar? And is the technology agile to fit in, what should I call it, pluggable? So can I plug in a couple of things? So it should not be a software, it should ideally be a platform. So if somebody comes in and walks in a platform and says that my platform is extensible, that is something that I would always love. Why? Because then I'll be able to add a bot to it. Then I will be able to add an API to it. Then I will be able to automate something. I would love to have a platform. So I think what you would need to keep in mind is, when you're evaluating, are you looking at a platform or are you looking at something very specific? Now, here is a pro and con. American companies in the past have always been very specific organizations. They solve a problem and they solve it very, very well. The good part is that you have high security because you're solving the problem in the best possible manner. The con part of it is you have 400 applications to protect, you suddenly have 400 security tools to manage. And then you have a larger problem of the skill sets of managing all of that. So I think you really need to find your own optimum. But my suggestion would be, try and look out for platforms rather than looking out for specific, because you don't use 100% features. You don't want to be perfect. This is a very imperfect world. And if it was becoming perfect, you will have something like a corona coming in. It will always remain an imperfect world. I don't know whether fundamentally I could answer your question,
Yeah, you actually
but I think,
answered. Thank you for that answered. But this is where the challenge is. Challenge is not with the IT. You might have a lot of the concept, a lot of thinking, a lot of solutions. But when it comes to business, they actually do shadow IT. They do such kind of thing which actually very difficult to. I mean. Uh, fit in into the architecture and the complexity and with the right solution. So this is where my question was more pertaining to business, addressing their concern and bringing that concept to the design thinking and actually adapting to it. So anyway, I personally felt you have answered.
I'm happy to maybe take this offline and maybe deep dive with you. I always like to do thought leadership. So I'm sure Mohan could share my email address, telephone numbers with you. I would love to try, and if you have a practical example for me, I might be able to even pinpoint and help you. I try to do this problem solving on a daily basis because we've invented a solution, and the solution was invented 10 years back, and every year you have to improvise it. Every time that I hire a person, he actually comes into my cabin and says, "Sir, I think what has been built is shit. We need to rewrite it. All the basics have not been taken care of." Everybody wants to rewrite something and restart the train. You can't keep restarting the train, right? You have to fit it in a running train. So you need to think through it always. And nobody wants to put that time and energy in thinking through it. And this is what happens in the organizations. Everybody would come in and say, "No, this solution does not work." So you buy a new one. Next year, somebody will come, No, this was all bullshit. This architecture was wrong because you need to do it something like this. So I would never do that. I would always try and fit it in a running train because otherwise you'll keep rebuilding it and you will get into a lot of challenges.
Thank you.
There's a question from Sri Rekha. How does a quantum strategy help in next 5 years of digital transformation of business?
So I was not able to relate the quantum strategy to the digital transformation, and that's why I responded to her by saying that I should revisit this. This is something interesting and could probably be useful in the digital transformation. So I may not have an answer at this point in time.
Yeah,
but
sorry,
I may want to
I didn't see
simply.
your answer. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, but I may want to simply put it. I may want to simply put it this way, that don't even try to. Let me put it this way. It's interesting to think through that, but I'm saying there is so much to crack in terms of digital transformation just in the next 1 year that you may not even want to think about a quantum strategy at this point in time. But it may be too soon for me to react. So I'll probably reserve my comments, and she could probably reach out to me and I may have a better answer for her.
I have one more question to you, Anilji, that the internet policy of the company today, when we are talking about endpoint security, the culture of the organization, the internet policy, the cyber security policy, don't you think that the culture and should we inculcate some kind of good behavior? Will it work in that way? What do you think about this kind of?
No, absolutely. You have to do that. It's no longer important. Actually, it's not important to build this culture. It is a necessity to build this culture today. You know why? Okay. Because if you look at education turning around, and especially with, I don't know if you've heard of companies like Byju's and White Hat Juniors, they are actually making kids learn how to do programming in second and third standard.
Yeah.
So the next generation, while we are struggling with security and APIs, the next generation would be building on some things on top of what we have, right? Yeah. So we started with maybe a C language and assembly. On top of that, somebody wrote a piece of library, and then it became a Java, and then it became a .NET, and now people copy it, and people have forgotten C language, right? And that's the most important if you really want to get into systems. So I think culture, I think building trust, awareness, getting it right, maybe again training them when they're in the second standard.
Are you aware of any companies which is consciously having kind of philosophical or kind of cultural?
I've not heard of any company. It's a very good, interesting business use case. I've not heard of companies going to the second standard and teaching people security and IT security and the pearls of social media and phones and all of that. I think it would become a subject for all I know. Very important one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I think now Mustafa, you would like to add some concluding words and finalize it. Anilji very well, and Please go ahead and unmute yourself and talk.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Anil. Thank you so much. I know I missed the first few minutes of this session, and you have already started. But I think who does not know Anil? You know, Anil is a known person, good friend. We have collaborated a lot. So
Yes.
thank you, Anil. And one thing I must say, whatever, and I have always liked one thing about the style of your presentation on that. It becomes so simplistic that on one end you don't really get scared of the cybersecurity threats and all those, because very simplistically you explain that, right? And on the other end, the importance is imposed on. So a lot of good aways I have noted down, to take aways, even though we are all senior professionals and I think we live in day out in the cybersecurity world. But amazingly, captured. Thanks a lot, Anil, for all the time you have spent with us. Very valuable feedback. And I think people who are on the call must agree, I'm sure that they agree with me that, this is how you have put it in the right perspective, whether it's an IoT, whether it's an OT, whether it's an IT, and how today the whole thing evolves, how the identity evolves. I think the only thing I would say is, we are having, I don't know how many identities we are carrying along with us of our own self. We also don't realize,
Absolutely.
as you said,
Absolutely.
mobile, watches, and so on, the Bluetooth devices, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But great session, Anil. Personally, I would like to thank you for giving us the time. I know you are a very busy schedule, so thank you very much. And I think the team and the entire membership must have enjoyed and has taken a valuable knowledge, which they will probably be able to use it in their professional life. Thanks a lot, Anil, for again coming
No,
back.
thank you.
Thanks most,
Thank you,
Anil.
Mustafa ji. And thank you. And I must thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be on the Saga platform in the UAE. And I've always cherished my memories of whenever I've been invited there to speak. And I've had very interesting conversations on the stage and outside the stage with all of you, and especially with yourself as well. It's been some time that we have caught up, of course, because of the pandemic, but would love to interact with you in person so that we can keep the technology and give it a rest for some time. So I must thank you, Mustafa ji, for this opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anil. And I look forward to meet you when you're in Dubai next time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mustafa ji, and for the nice words. And Anilji, it was a great pleasure to have you here in Dubai online, and we will have more such interactions, of course, with the ICA or whatever it is. You have been always a great vendor, and thanks a lot. Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, and all of you, please do have a safe time, and hope to see you soon. Once, hopefully, the world is a better place to travel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.